All right, guys, let's just wrap this up with a few more topics and our challenges facing compensation professionals. We will start with what's called the compensation productivity gap. So let's start with the first question, very basic. What is productivity? So that is really just that real output per hour of work, or how efficiently labor is being used to produce goods and services. So what hastens productivity growth? It's not humans, it's whenever we start investing more in capital, equipment, and information technology. So what is this gap? Okay, so here's, if you look over to this chart, what you're going to see is in 1979, in particular, right, productivity really started to go up, whereas the compensation hasn't. And as you can see over here, productivity has grown 6 times more than pay since 1979. But again, if you start to think about what was going on, this is a real boon with information technology, new forms of advanced technology that's going to make us more productive. And then what is labor share of income? That's the amount of income the corporation makes that goes to labor versus other components of production, such as intermediate purchases or capital investment. All right, so it's how much is the labor getting, the employees receiving, based on the amount of income that the employer is pulling in. Let's move on to talk about automation and wage polarization. So as we're talking about that 1979, right, and again, this automation, information technology, a lot of things are growing. And so when you see in these advanced economies higher wages, so do I want to pay these higher wages? And we just got through talking about perhaps increasing the minimum wage. So in the United States, we want to increase how much we're paying human beings, or do we want to look toward automation? And that's why more companies do tend, to go toward more automation. So what does that mean for employment? Well, history has shown us that, it does cause a major shift. So what happens is some people lose their jobs, but it also creates jobs for other people. So if you look at this, it talks about low-skilled jobs, but their low-skill, high-touch jobs have actually increased. Middle-skilled jobs, those primarily in manufacturing, where you're producing and assembling, have decreased. Automation increases, right? High-skilled jobs, ideas, creativity, cognitive tasks, those have increased. Here, what you can see is this shift that happens. So what's going on? New work that involves expertise, that involves interaction with people, that involves managing people. Those things are growing. Those things that we're processing data, collecting data, anything that is predictable and repetitive is decreasing. So when you see these things happening, again, some people lose their jobs, other people are gaining jobs. So here's what's going to have to happen. These employers are going to need to provide training, skills training to their employees. And also employees are going to have to take the time to upskill, to learn new things. You've always got to be learning and growing in order to stay relevant in your job, because it's not always going to look the same that it looks today. Okay, so what we're talking about here is, again, pre-pandemic. But if you look from 2009 on, the economy has improved and unemployment was really low, and yet for some reason wages weren't growing, and economists were a little baffled by this. So they needed to come up with reasons, understanding why, and these are these theories. So maybe it's because we are competing with overseas rivals, right? So because of that, if We don't want to increase our wages here. We'll just take it someplace else. Automation, just what we're talking about. The more you have robotics, artificial intelligence, you're going to pay, you're going to invest your money in that capital equipment versus in increasing wages of your people. Healthcare and other benefits costs increased again. So employers are just balancing that out, making that shift. They're going to pay more for benefits, so they're paying less for wages. Unionization has declined. So there's nobody really to advocate on a grand scale for lots of employees. Older employees are leaving, right? Highly paid baby boomers are retiring. So again, if you're looking at wages across the entire population, it looks like wages are going down, but maybe it's really just that all these baby boomers are retiring. And then you have faster capital depreciation. So again, we're investing in a lot of this technology, but that technology is changing really fast. We've got to upgrade it often. Again, now we're investing more in that capital investment versus in wages. But the good news for you guys is that human resource managers are probably not going to be replaced with technology. There are certain things where artificial intelligence comes into play, such as in staffing, but even there it's very, very risky because you're using this artificial technology is based on an algorithm based on the past. If you've had discrimination or biases in the past, that carries through in artificial intelligence. So good news. Human beings need human beings, need human resources. All right, so now let's move on to the gender pay gap. What is that? But really all it's saying is that their proportion of women's earnings relative to men's earnings are less. So then we talked about comparable worth, not exact job to exact job, exact skill sets to exact skill sets. Instead, it's comparable worth. So comparable pay for comparable work. And that's where this point method of job evaluation comes into play. What's interesting here is if you remember back when we were talking about job evaluations, there are different job evaluation structures and systems for different types of jobs. So here's the risk. It can be problematic if you have one job evaluation structure for stereotypically female jobs and then another one for stereotypically male jobs. And the book talks about like janitors and maintenance workers make more than people who are in housekeeping or in food service, even though those are very comparable jobs. All right. So a job evaluation, if you had one job evaluation system structure in place that goes over those four compensable factors, the universal compensable factors of skill, effort, responsibility, and working conditions, then that could be a good thing in terms of, you know, if you really want to address this gender pay gap, okay? So why are some states banning asking about salary history? Because it has absolutely no impact on how much you should pay. If we go through all of these systems and structures, learning about, you know, doing our job analysis, coming up with a job description, doing a competitive market survey of compensation, we have our job evaluation, we look at the internal structure, how much value does this job have to this organization, okay? So show that women make less money than men, then that can carry through. So if I know how much you've been making in your last job, I can just go, oh, well, heck, a 10% raise, she'll be super happy with that. Not about the job, but about the person, you know, what she's made in the past. So instead, let's really focus on how much value this job has. We'll have a pay range, right? And then we should be able to determine how much this person should earn based on their level of skills and education and experience in this particular job. In fact, I was just reading today that SHRM has submitted an amicus brief to the Supreme Court to address this, because there are a lot of employers who still say that they use it only for good. They're using asking about salary history for good, not for evil. So they are looking at this salary history so that they can attract the very best people. And so maybe you made too much. So now we want to know how much money you've made in the past so that we can have a competitive offer. Or it's kind of a way to do a salary survey in a market and make sure that we're still competitive. But again, there is a downside to that as well. I also wanted to bring up that small companies have a history. They're more likely to have this gap than large companies, and they do it because in a small company you don't really have to have a lot of pay transparency, and it's probably more idiosyncratic of how well somebody can negotiate and advocate for themselves. And those can probably go hand in hand. So it's just interesting that in larger organizations, the more structure that you have and the more transparency you have, the less that gender gap is going to exist. So just some statistics, some data, and it just shows that, again, overall, women earn 79 cents for the dollar, but that's not job for job. So if you look at this controlled gender pay gap, which is looking at men and women with the same job and the same qualifications, it's 98 cents to the dollar. So it seems like it's not that bad. Okay, but what I want to show you is it's the opportunity gap. All right. So here on the left is men, and over here on the right is women, and then you have these age groups. So as people age, you would think that they would get those promotions. Well, that tends to happen more for men than it does for women. And so manager, supervisor, or higher for women and men, there's an 8% gap when they're 30 to 44, but ages 45 and older, it's a 15% opportunity gap. Okay. 56% of men, 41% of women move up the ranks within those organizations. All right, let's wrap it up with pay transparency. So what is that? We actually had a student group do a presentation on this, so maybe you're a little more adept at understanding what this is, but it's just, let's share with people, how much people are making. Like, what is that pay? What is the formula? How, what is the process and the criteria for specific pay and how, setting that pay and the increases? What are the pay grades and the pay ranges? And so being a state-run institution, the University of Mississippi, right, we have that, but we only have that, it's more clear for those jobs that are on the staff side than for the faculty side, although you can still find that out for faculty. So how can pay transparency be good? Well, of course it can be good because it can promote motivation and higher performance over the long term. So as you are more transparent, as your systems improve and you make sure that these gaps and the inequity go away, then that's actually going to improve the way people feel about the organization. The trust is going to be there. Pay is going to be less of a factor. People are going to be more productive and more motivated. What's the downside? So in the short term, right? Oh, I thought I was being fairly paid. It turns out I'm not being fairly paid. So now maybe my motivation goes down. Maybe I want to leave this organization. Maybe I just stop being as productive. Maybe I increase my politicking for change. Sometimes there's this a perception of inaccuracy. I'm so much better than that guy. It's a problem because we tend to think that we are much better than we are. And because of that, we should be thinking that we should be paid more. So maybe it actually creates competition. Maybe it creates some downside with that. A good thing, it could help with that gender pay gap. Bad thing, it could lead to kind of a flattening of pay. And, if companies just are like, this is too much of a fight, so instead they're going to not distinguish between really good employees and not so good employees. And again, that damages the motivation of your really good employees, and those are the ones who might want to leave. Some organizations might just go with seniority. Well, again, that's not a great system if you want to motivate people to be more productive. All right, I think that's it. You guys are awesome, and I thank you so much.